Hello, so this is the slow practice video for the Bach Sonata number 2, Allegro. Now I'm going to be going through it very slowly. I'm not going to do any bowings because bowings are optional for the test. And then I'll go through a line, I'll explain anything, any shifts, any accidentals that happen, and then I'll move on to the next one. So, for the first line, here's what that sounds like. So the only thing to really look out for in this measure is that you have a high 3 on the G string. You have a D sharp, so it's going to be a half step between your 4th finger and that 3rd step there. So like that. Now for the second line, here's what the second line sounds like. Now the shift here that I'm doing is I'm going to second position to play, so I don't have to play. It just does help it sound better, but if you would like to, you can just stay in first for that. Now the third line does get quite a bit trickier, but here's what it sounds like very slow. So let's break this down measure by measure. Now in this first measure of this third line, we have what you can play is either an extension with your 4th finger, that high note that you see, or you can shift into 3rd. Now I prefer to shift into 3rd because you have an open string that you can shift on both on your way up and on your way down, which looks like this. Alright. And you could just play it with a 4th finger. But as you see, that is quite the stretch. Now, for these next 2 beats, 2 groups of 16th notes, we have another high 3 on the D string, and this time you also have a high 2 on the E string. So you play that like this. Just be careful because you have a high 2 on the E string but not on the A string. Now the next measure of this third line repeats exactly what you did but with a piano dynamic. So we're just going to move on from that. The third beat of the third line, all you have to really watch out for is all the natural notes because you've been having some sharp accidentals in the previous measures, but you're back to your normal key signature with low 2s on every string but the G string, with your low 1 on your E string, and normal 3s. Alright, and now here is what the 4th line sounds like. We're just going to go measure by measure. In the first measure of this 4th line, you just need to look out for another G sharp high 3 on the on the D string. with a half step on your fourth finger once you play that note. And in the second measure, you might have noticed that I decided to shift to third position. Now this is not entirely necessary, but it is helpful for me, because what you're doing is you're playing a high 3 on the G string, then a normal 4 on both the D string and the A string. But for me, it's kind of hard to cover those notes with my fourth fingers because it's quite small, right? And you could also try and play an open string. However, that would mean you would have to jump a string for a string crossing, which is kind of difficult. So instead, I just go up to third position with that high 3, which becomes a high 1, and see my second finger is tucked right next to that high 1, and I play. And be careful, because the 3 on the D string is not high like the 3 on the G string is. So you have to move your finger back in the middle of that. Like that. And the way I shift back, you can shift back any way you like, but I keep playing in third position and I play a fourth finger on the G string. And I shift to an open I play an open D string. And then shift while I'm playing that. Like that. And for the next measure, it's pretty standard. You keep doing those arpeggios. But then at this point, you want to shift into half position. So your fingers are going to be very crammed next to each other, because we have a high 1 on the G string, but on the D and A, they're normal. So we're going to play them with our second fingers right next to it instead, like this. Okay, so that's the fourth line. And here is what the fifth line sounds like slow. And now there are quite a few accidentals in this line, but we're going to go through it one by one once again. So in the first measure of this line, you're completely normal until you get to the third beat, where you want to go into half position again. So, and then you're going to slide your first finger down to a low 1 on the D string. And then normally, if you weren't to do that, you would play 2, 1, 0, 2, 1, 0 on the A string, but instead we're going to go into half position and have all of our fingers really close to each other, so it sounds like this. Alright, and then you want to go back into normal position now and play a high 1 on the E string, like that. And then for the next measure, you have a couple options as to where you can shift into third position, and you should shift into third position because you do have some string crossings that would be pretty ugly if you didn't. I personally choose to shift on the third beat, but you could shift on the second as well. But here's how I do it. So we play. And once we play that open D string, I shift up to that high 3, except I'm using a 1, of course. And again, be careful because that's not a high 3 on the D string, but it is on the G string. And then for the next measure, you start with the high 3 on the A string, but I am still in third position, so I'm going to use a high 1 that's tucked right next to that E. And then we have that open string we can shift down on. And I choose to cover that 3 with my fourth finger so I don't get mixed up when I play a normal 3 on the E string. And then be careful because this is a D sharp, so that's a low one on the D string. And then when you go up, make sure to make that high 3 on the A string. Alright, so that's all for that line. And for line 6, it looks kind of tricky and it sounds kind of intimidating, but here's how that sounds slow. So once more, you have a couple options for shifting and extensions. So on the second beat of the first measure, after you play, and that is a high one, which is unusual because we have a sharp there, you can either play an open 0 and then an extension, or you can play and go up to third. I think third probably sounds cleaner. And then, when you go back to the A on the next note, you can shift down again. Now, you've noticed I've stayed in third for a while. I think it's easier because you avoid a really big jump. If you were to go to first position like the music suggests, you'd have to go and skip 2 strings, but if you stayed in third position, you would only have to skip 1 string, but then you would have to shift back down again. And then you, on that last note, you heard me play a high 2 and a normal 3. Okay, so that's all for that line. So here is what the 7th line sounds like played through straight. And then we're going to break that down measure by measure. So in that first measure of that line, you stay in normal position until you reach the third beat, in which case you can try to stay in first, but then you would have to jump a string for a string crossing, which is quite awkward. So you can go into second and play 2, 2, 4, 2, 4. I'm personally more comfortable in third position, so you shift up to a 1 and play 1, 3, 1, 3, open, 3, like this. Like that. And then for this next measure of the line, it's just going up and down little scales. But you see there, you have a high 2 about halfway through that measure, so watch out for that. Alright, that's all for this line. And now we're the third line from the bottom of the page, and I'm going to play this first part in half position, which is why my fingers are going to look weird. But here's what that measure looks like played through slow. Like I said, you need to start that one in half position, so you're going to be playing a high 1 on the E string, but we're going to cover that with a really scrunched 2, and then the 2 on the A string becomes a 3, like that, and then we play that low one on the D string, and then go back to the A, and play one more 2, which is actually a 1, but we're going to play it as a 2, and then we can go back to normal position on the open string. And they recommend that you shift into third here, and this is really just a matter of preference on what you want to do, because some people don't like trilling. They like to do that in second. I'm just going to stay in first. So but I am going to shift to third there for this next measure. And that's a half step because it would be a high 3 on the G string if you were in first position. And then we're going to go to the D string, and we're going to shift back into half position and play the high 2 with a third finger instead, so you can reach the low 1. Then you can go back to normal position and just play with your third finger again. Alright, so now we're going to move on to the second line from the end, and this one's a little bit better. Here's what it sounds like slow. Okay, so for the first measure of this, just watch out for the high 3 on the A string. That turns back into a normal 3 right there. And then for the last beat of that first measure of that second to last line, you can either do an extension with your fourth finger again, or you can shift up to third again, although this time you don't have an open string leading up to it. I think it's still preferable to go up to third, because you can shift back with an open string like this. But if you'd prefer, you can go. Alright, and then for this next measure in this line, we have another high 3 on the A string, and also a high 1 on the E string. And then the next time I'm going to play this high 3, I'm going to use a 4 because we have another 3 on the E string coming up. Alright, so last line now, and here's what that sounds like slow. So let's break that down. In the first measure of that, you have a high 3 on the A string. And then in this next one, you have a high 1. Alright, and then in this next measure, you have a high 2 on the D string. And here's where you have to go back into half position again. But you shift back on that A there. So here's in half. Play an open A. And then back to first with a normal second finger. And here I'm shifting to second to avoid some string crossings. So here's what that looks like. notice I shifted into third position at the end. That's pretty unnecessary. I just think it sounds better that way. But you can choose to do whatever you would like. So now that I've played it through slow, I'm going to play it through completely at that same slow tempo. Okay, so that certainly wasn't perfect, but I hope you found that helpful, and good luck to you!